You've already become a stranger to yourself, 3 times at least. And if you're quietly ashamed of how many day ones quietly became day nones, hear this. Those abandoned starts were never the failure. You were changing the whole time, with no hand on the wheel. The you from 10 years ago would flinch at how you talk to yourself now, and nobody asked your permission for a word of it. So the real question was never whether you can change. It's whether the next version of you gets authored on purpose or accreted by accident like all the others. Over the next 30 minutes, I'm going to hand you the mechanism, the actual, almost mechanical process that identity science has worked out for how a person becomes someone new on purpose. By the end, you'll understand why some changes rewrite you and others evaporate by Friday, why the honest number is 90 days and not 21, and why the people who truly pull this off tend to tell almost no one. But I have to build it in order. The first piece is the one everyone skips, and skipping it is exactly why the last 10 attempts didn't hold. The piece everyone skips is this: they aim at the wrong layer. When most people say they want to become unrecognizable, they mean the visible things: a leaner body, a bigger number in the account, a version of themselves that walks into a room without shrinking. Those are outcomes.
And outcomes are slow, which means for the first few weeks the mirror lies to you, the scale barely moves, and the whole project feels like pushing a stalled car uphill. So you quit, blaming the method, when the real problem was that you'd been staring at the one layer guaranteed to move last. The people who actually transform are aiming one level underneath the outcome, at the quiet running assumption of who they are. Change that, and the outcomes follow almost as a byproduct, because a person doesn't stay much above their own self-image for very long. There's an old puzzle that captures how this really feels from the inside. A wooden ship has a single rotted plank pulled out and replaced, then months later another, then another, year after year, until decades on not one original board remains, and yet everyone still calls it the same ship, and it never once stopped sailing. That's what reinvention actually is. There's no launch day. There's no morning you stand transformed on a mountaintop. There's just plank after plank swapped so gradually that one ordinary Tuesday you catch yourself reacting to an insult, or a craving, or a compliment you'd normally deflect, in a way the old you simply wouldn't have, and you realize the ship is made of entirely new wood. 2 findings from psychology explain why the plank-by-plank thing works on a human brain. The first is Leon Festinger's cognitive dissonance, the low, itchy discomfort you feel when your actions and your picture of yourself don't line up. Hold that discomfort long enough and something has to give, and usually it's the self-image that bends to match the behavior. The second is Darrell Bem's self-perception theory, and it runs the opposite direction from common sense. Bem showed that we don't only act out who we already are, we also watch our own behavior like an outsider and draw conclusions from it. I did that, so I suppose that's the kind of person I am. You are in part reading yourself off your own actions like a stranger at the next table, which changes the whole assignment. Stop setting outcome goals and start setting identity goals. Make the target this: becoming the kind of person who doesn't negotiate with themselves at 6 in the morning, and then hold every small choice up to a single question. Does this enter as evidence for the old ship or the new one? Because the brain is quietly building the case either way, whether you're watching it or not. But that raises the question that has quietly wrecked more transformations than laziness ever has. How long before the evidence adds up to a new verdict? Almost everyone thinks they know the answer. Almost everyone inherited a number that's wrong. You've heard it your whole life. 21 days to build a habit. 3 short weeks and the new behavior clicks into place and runs itself. It's one of the most repeated numbers in all of self-improvement, and it has quietly sabotaged millions of people. Because it sets you up to expect that if change still feels like effort after 3 weeks, something has gone wrong. So on day 22, when it still feels forced, you conclude you're the exception, the broken one, and you fold. That number has an actual origin. In the 1960s, a plastic surgeon named Maxwell Maltz noticed that his patients took around 3 weeks to stop reaching for a limb that was no longer there, or to stop being startled by their own new face in the mirror. He called it a minimum of about 21 days, a floor for grieving a changed body. And the self-help world quietly deleted the hedges and sold you the floor as a promise. The honest number is messier and far kinder. When Philippa Lai and her team at University College London actually followed people forming new habits, day by day, the average time for a behavior to turn automatic wasn't 21 days, it was 66. And the range ran from 18 days for something easy all the way out to 254 days for something hard.
If you've ever felt broken because a change hadn't gone automatic in a month, sit with that, because you weren't failing. You were on schedule, and someone sold you the wrong clock. 90 days is an honest working span, long enough to carry most everyday behaviors across the automaticity line, and to pile up evidence too large for your old self-image to keep arguing with. It also lets you use something the behavioral scientists Catherine Milkman and Heng-Chin Dai documented and named the fresh start effect, the real, measurable lift in motivation people feel at the edges of time. A new month, a birthday, the first of anything, even a plain Monday. A defined 90-day block hands you a clean start line, and just as importantly, a clean finish line to run toward. So pick your 90 days, give it a real start date and a real end date, and write them down. And then do the one thing almost nobody does. Pre-decide, right now, that somewhere around week 3, this will stop feeling exciting and start feeling like a slog. Count on it. That dip is where the average person quits. Cross it, and you've left average behind. Expect the slog, and it loses its power to surprise you into stopping. But knowing the number buys you nothing if you're waiting for the wrong thing to happen first, and most people are. They're waiting to feel like a new person before they'll act like one, and they've got the machinery running exactly backward. Watch how a person normally tries to change, and you'll see them standing at a door that only opens from the other side. They want to feel confident before they'll speak up, disciplined before they'll train, worthy before they'll ask for the thing they actually want. So they wait, and the feeling never quite arrives on its own, and they take that absence as proof it was never meant for them. The arrow mostly runs the other way. Your brain builds the feeling of being someone out of the evidence of what you've done, which means the fastest route to feeling like a new person is to hand yourself a pile of small proofs first and let the feeling catch up. There's a pair of studies that shows this with a single changed word. Christopher Bryan and Carol Dweck ran experiments in the run-up to an election where all they altered was the grammar of a survey. One group was asked how important it was to them to vote. The other was asked how important it was to be a voter. Same act, one framed as a verb, the other as an identity, a noun you get to be. The noun group turned out at meaningfully higher rates because people will reach for a thing they get to be far more readily than for a task they merely have to do. Now picture a woman rebuilding herself after a couple of rough years, the kind of years that leave you quietly unsure you're still capable of following through on anything. She doesn't announce a transformation. She does one push-up on the bedroom floor. She sends one honest email she'd been dodging for a week. She keeps one small promise she made only to herself. And the part that does the actual work, she lets herself notice it. That's the kind of thing the new me does. Each of those is a tiny exhibit entered into evidence. String enough of them together, and the verdict about who she is shifts on its own, because you cannot stare at 3 weeks of proof and keep believing you're the person who never follows through. So speak in identity nouns rather than verbs. Say, I'm a runner, still early, instead of I'm trying to get into running. And keep the evidence somewhere you can see it, a visible tally, a row of marks on a card. You're building a case, exhibit by exhibit, about who you are. There's just one belief that can quietly cancel all of this before you enter a single exhibit. It's so common that almost everyone carries it without noticing, and it whispers the same thing to a 20-year-old and a 60-year-old. This, right here, is the finished version of me. It's a trick of the mind, and it has a name. The psychologists Jordi Quaidbach, Daniel Gilbert, and Timothy Wilson surveyed thousands of people across every age and found the same lopsided belief everywhere they looked. Ask people how much they'd changed over the previous 10 years, and they'd say enormously. Their values, their tastes, who they could stand to be around, all transformed. Then ask those same people how much they expected to change over the next 10 years, and they'd say barely at all. Everyone, at every age, feels as though they've just now finished becoming themselves. They named it the end of history illusion, the sense that history carried you to exactly here and then politely stopped. Picture a man of 38 flipping through old photos. He winces at the music he was so sure about at 28, at the certainties he'd defend loudly at a party, at the clumsy way he handled a fight back then. He can see, plainly, how much he's changed. And then, in the very same breath, he assumes the 38-year-old holding the phone is the final draft, that this version, unlike everyone before it, is done. So he starts making choices as if this self were permanent. He decides he's too old to start, that his personality has set like concrete, that the story is basically written. And he's wrong in the most ordinary way a person can be wrong.
Carol Dweck's work on mindset adds the twist that matters here. The belief itself is a lever. People who see their traits as changeable go on to change more than people who see them as fixed. The conviction becomes partly self-fulfilling. And Hazel Marcus and Paula Nurius handed us the tool to aim it, the possible self, a vivid, specific picture of a future you that starts acting like a magnet on your present behavior. So put that person on paper, in detail, a normal Tuesday in their life, hour by hour. What time do they wake, and what's the first thing they reach for? What do they eat? What do they refuse? How do they speak to the person who annoys them at 11 in the morning? Make it concrete enough that you could play them like a role. And then treat the current you as a rough first draft of that person. That's all any version of you has ever been. But there's a flaw in everything I've told you so far, and it's time I admitted it. Every piece of this, the votes, the exhibits, the possible self, has quietly assumed that you'll supply the effort to keep acting like the new person, day after day, on the tired days and the flat days and the days you don't feel a thing. And if that were the real requirement, most of us would be sunk. But the turn is this, it mostly isn't. Most of what you do in a day, you don't actually decide. Wendy Wood, who has spent a career studying this, estimates that close to 40% of what we do each day is habit, behavior fired off automatically by familiar surroundings, running with no fresh decision behind it. The same chair, the same phone on the same nightstand, within the same reach of the same hand, the same route home that just happens to pass the same lit window of the same shop. You think you're choosing. A lot of the time, you're just responding to cues, running on rails you laid so long ago you stopped seeing them. This is the secret behind something you've probably felt and never explained. Why people who move to a new city or start a new job so often find a bad habit just gone. They didn't outmuscle it. The cues that triggered it simply vanished, and the behavior had nothing left to fire from. The room did the work all along. Willpower barely showed up. You don't have to move to use this. Take someone who wants to become a person who reads at night instead of scrolling in the dark until her eyes burn. The willpower version fails inside a week. She lies in bed, phone in hand, promising to stop after just one more. So she stops leaning on willpower and changes the room instead. She charges the phone in the kitchen overnight and lays a book on her actual pillow.
Now the new behavior costs her nothing because the book is literally under her head, and the old one costs a cold walk to another room. And to seal it, she borrows a technique from the psychologist Peter Gallwitzer called implementation intentions, a preloaded if-then plan. If it's 9 at night and I'm in bed, then I open the book. She's decided in advance, which means when the moment comes, there's no negotiation left to lose. And the negotiation was always where she lost. So spend one day just watching your own cues, like a stranger steadying you. Then change 2 of them this week. Make the new behavior stupidly easy to begin and the old one mildly annoying to reach. And write one if-then plan for the exact moment you usually cave. Because you'll cave in the same place you always do, and the plan is you leaving yourself a note there in advance. But there's one more room you live in, and you can't rearrange it by moving your phone. You carry it everywhere. It's the story you tell about your own past. And for a lot of people, that story has been quietly built to keep them exactly where they are. Dan McAdams spent his career studying how people turn a pile of experiences into a life story. And he found that we don't simply have our past, we arrange it into a shape with a plot. And the shape we choose predicts how we cope and whether we grow at all. He noticed 2 recurring plots in the way people tell their lives. In one, a good situation gets ruined. Things were fine, and then they fell apart, and the story sours from there. He called those contamination sequences. In the other, the suffering leads somewhere, opens onto something that seemed to need it. He called those redemption sequences. Take 2 people laid off from the same company on the same gray afternoon. One tells it like this: "This is what always happens to me. I get close to something good and it collapses, and by now I have to admit the common thread is me." The other tells it like this:
That was an ending I couldn't bring myself to choose, so it chose me, and it turned out to be chapter 1 of the thing I actually built. It's the same event, same fluorescent lights, same cardboard box, same silent drive home, and 2 completely different futures, because a brain will bend hard to stay consistent with whatever story it already believes about itself. And underneath that sits the thing this whole idea is really about. Your worst chapter is not a measurement of your worth. Read that slowly, because a lot of people have never once been told it. The hardest thing that happened to you is data. It's a setup for something. Sometimes it's just weather that rolled through one season of your life and moved on.
But it is not a verdict on what you're worth, and it never had the authority to be one. The person who becomes unrecognizable in 90 days is almost always someone who first quietly retired the story that they themselves were the problem. So take the failure you're most ashamed of, the one that came to mind just now, the one you'd hoped I wasn't going to make you look at, and deliberately retell it as the origin of who you're becoming. Not to excuse it, not to wrap it in something false, just to strip it of the one power it never earned, the power to tell you what you're worth. But rewriting the story doesn't make you bulletproof. Somewhere around day 40, something small is going to go wrong, smaller than you'd expect. And what you do in the 10 seconds after it will matter more than all the resolve you started with. Almost everyone gets that moment wrong, and they get it wrong in a way that feels, at the time, like taking responsibility. 2 researchers, Janet Polivy and Peter Herman, studying dieters, put a name to that exact moment, the what the hell effect. A dieter eats one cookie they hadn't planned on, and in the space of a single breath, they file the whole day as ruined and think, well, what the hell, might as well finish the box. The cookie was nothing, 200 calories, gone by lunch, forgotten by dinner.
But the story that the day was already blown does the real damage, because it turns one small slip into permission to abandon the entire thing. The same trap swallows people 40 days into a 90-day change. 1 skipped workout becomes 3 skipped workouts, becomes, I guess I'm just not that kind of person after all. And notice what's underneath it. The harsh inner voice that shows up right then feels like accountability. It feels responsible, even virtuous, to lash yourself for slipping. The research on self-compassion shows the opposite, and it runs dead against instinct. Kristen Neff's work and a set of studies by Juliana Branis and Serena Chen found that people who meet their own failures with kindness instead of contempt don't get lazy and don't let themselves off the hook. They take more responsibility afterward. They try harder, not less. Self-criticism floods you with shame, and shame has exactly one instinct: to hide, to go quiet, to quit before anyone sees. Self-compassion keeps you in the room long enough to log the next data point, and logging the next data point is the entire game. And when you can't find a shred of motivation, no spark, no drive, nothing, remember the order these things actually come in. Motivation mostly follows action. It rarely leads.
It's the principle underneath what therapists call behavioral activation. You do the thing badly, half-heartedly, at 10% of your best, and the doing is what generates the will to do it again. You don't wait to feel like it. You move first, and the feeling comes to find you on the way. So decide your response to a slip before the slip ever happens. When it comes, and it will, name it out loud as one data point, not a verdict. Speak to yourself the way you'd speak to a friend 40 days into something hard, which is to say, with a little mercy. And take the very next small action within 24 hours. The fast, kind recovery is worth more than the flawless streak you were never going to keep anyway. There's one last force that will either accelerate all of this or quietly gut it, and it's the one people handle most carelessly of all. It's other people, who you let close, and this is the part almost everyone gets backward, how much you tell them. You cannot actually see yourself, not directly. You catch yourself reflected in the faces of the people around you, and you assemble a self-image out of those reflections. The sociologist Charles Cooley called it the looking glass self, the idea that who you think you are is largely built from how you imagine you appear in the eyes of others.
It's why the very same person can feel sharp and capable in one room and small and stuck in another. You partly become whoever your closest mirrors keep treating you as, so proximity is a real lever, and a gentle one. Spend time, even loosely, even at the edges, around people who already live inside the identity you're building, and let their ordinary become your ordinary. The things they don't even notice themselves doing, you start absorbing as the baseline. You don't have to announce anything to borrow a room's normal. You just have to be in it. But there's a warning that almost all announce your goals advice gets exactly wrong. Peter Gallwitzer, the same researcher behind those if-then plans, studied what happens when people go public with an identity goal. When they announced who they were becoming and got acknowledged for it, something quietly backfired. The recognition itself gave them a premature taste of completion. The applause scratched the very itch the work was supposed to scratch, and their follow-through actually dropped. Picture two people starting the same 90 days. The first posts the declaration, tags it, collects the likes and the "you've got this" comments, and by Friday feels so much like a new person that the actual work has quietly lost its urgency. He got the feeling of arriving without going anywhere. The second tells almost no one. She just stacks her evidence, quietly, for 3 months, and lets people find out by running into the finished result, by turning around one day and not quite recognizing her. One of them is unrecognizable at the end of the 90 days. It isn't the one who announced it. So choose your mirrors on purpose. Get near the people who already are what you're becoming, but hold the transformation close. Don't narrate it. Let the work itself be the only announcement, and let the results do all the talking you're tempted to do now. And that brings me back to the promise I made you at the start. The mechanism, the actual machinery of becoming someone new on purpose instead of by accident. Here it is, in one piece, now that you can see all of it. It runs one direction. You act first, small, undeniable, one plank at a time, and your brain reads those actions and quietly revises its verdict about who you must be. You give it 90 honest days instead of 21 dishonest ones. You stop leaning on willpower and redesign the room so the new self is the path of least resistance. You retell the story so your worst chapter stops posing as a verdict on your worth. You meet the inevitable slip with mercy instead of contempt, because mercy is what keeps you gathering evidence. And you keep the whole thing quiet, so the applause never robs you of the finish. That's the whole mechanism.
It isn't a personality transplant or a burst of willpower summoned from nowhere. It's a steady stream of small proof that the person you want to be is already the one acting right now, today, until one day your brain simply concedes the case. So think one more time about the mirror. 90 days from now, you'll stand in front of the same glass, and the face will be more or less the same face. The eyes, the lines, the tired, familiar geography of it. But the person behind the eyes, the one who decides how you react in the first flat minute after the alarm, how you speak to yourself in the 10 seconds after a mistake, what you've quietly come to consider normal, that person can be someone the current you would barely recognize. You got there the only way anyone does. 90 days of quiet votes, gathered exhibits, and a refusal to let one bad chapter stand as the final word on your worth. Remember where we started, all those day ones you were ashamed of, all those Mondays that came to nothing. You were changing the whole time. You just didn't know you were holding the pen. You've already become unrecognizable 3 times by accident. This will only be the first time you did it on purpose. The old ship is still sailing. It never stopped. It's just made of new wood now.
And whether the next version of you gets authored on purpose or accreted by accident like all the others, what decides that is smaller and closer than 90 days. It's this next hour and one plank pulled inside it. One small vote cast now while this is still warm before the feeling fades. If this gave you somewhere to begin, stay close and let these ideas keep rebuilding the way you see yourself, one quiet plank at a time. Don't try to change everything by morning. Take the smallest thing you heard tonight and do it once, today, without telling a soul. That's how the real ones always start. For now, just sit with it. That's enough.